Hello, everyone. Give us just a moment to let a few more people in, and we will start as soon as they're done. Hi, we still have a few more people trickling in, so I just want to give everyone a minute to join us, and then we will start in. Okay, I think we will start in now. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's lecture night, More Than Words, Empowering Nonverbal Youth Through Multimodal Communication Access. My name is Elisa Grishman, and I am the founder and director of Access Mob Pittsburgh. I am a fat white woman with brown curly hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt with blue text that says Disabled Joy is Revolutionary. For those of you unfamiliar in disabled spaces, we not tend to, but we describe ourselves for better access for people who are blind and low vision, and also better access for people who are on their phones. Per request, I'm going to describe our interpreter tonight too. So our interpreter is a white male with short brown hair and a salt and pepper beard and mustache, and he's wearing glasses. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I especially would like to thank my board of directors who helped me put this on every other month or every month now. We have some extra events coming up. So thank you to Debbie, Donna, Kendra, Mallory, Monica, Nyota, and Reggie. Um, Many thanks to Katie, who is our host and meeting manager and doing all of our tech work tonight. I want to acknowledge and thank Disability Pride Pennsylvania for being our fiscal sponsor and helping us, keep ourselves running. And the biggest thanks in the world to the Opportunity Fund, whose grant is helping uh, make everything happen tonight. This meeting is being recorded. So if anyone has to leave early, or I hear that there's storms coming in, if your power cuts out, you'll be able to watch this all after the fact. Closed captions are available, and a link to the transcript will be in the chat. Please remain muted and turn your cameras off. The chat is disabled between participants. You may create a new chat with Access Mob Pittsburgh host in the chat if you have a question or a problem. If you need to see how, the link is being posted in the chat now. If there is time for a Q&A at the end, please raise your hand, either with the virtual reaction or let the facilitator know if you have a problem with the virtual reaction, and wait to be called on. You will be asked to unmute and or turn on your camera. You may ask your question verbally or in ASL, or type your questions into the chat for your Access Mob facilitator to read out loud. Do not turn on your camera unless you need to use it for ASL, and wait for the interpreter to acknowledge you. For anyone who is joining us tonight on the phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute. If we don't have time for questions at the end, or if you come up with questions after the fact, please email your questions to Access Mob Pittsburgh, ACCESS MOB PITTS burgh@gmail.com. And just to let you know that after the event tonight, we'll be sending out an email to everyone with a survey. We'd really love your feedback on how this went so that we can make sure that we're doing good by you and that we can do better in the future. And if there are any resources that need to be sent out, we'll be sending those out at the time.
Mhm.
So, to welcome our wonderful speaker tonight, Dr. Tyi-Sanna Jones is a proud Pittsburgh native and graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. She also holds advanced degrees from the University of Kansas and the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. With over 20 years of experience in education, Dr. Jones has served as classroom teacher, teacher educator, and strategic consultant for both educational and organizational settings. A passionate advocate for access and inclusion, she is widely recognized as a dynamic facilitator, community builder, and thought partner. Beyond her professional work, Dr. Jones is a yogi, author, creative, fashion enthusiast, and self proclaimed overthinker. She lives with intention, grounded in faith, love, and purpose. Thank you, Dr. Jones. I'll turn this over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lessa, for having me here. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you all. As we shared, oh, I have access to my slides. I forgot it's on me. I'm doing slides here. Where's my slides? Thanks. I need my slides. I'm sorry. I should have checked that. No. Slide control. I'm not able to push my slides. We didn't, that's the one thing we didn't check earlier. Sorry. I'm going to unshare and start this. If that's so, can I unshare? Okay. Let's go here. All right. Can everyone see?
Yes, we can see it, Tyi-Sanna.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so who am I? I'm Tyi-Sanna Jones. In this picture, this image of me, I am a light-skinned Black woman with long braids, orange glasses. Today, I have my braids sitting on top of my head with red glasses. And so the premise of my talk is mostly about why this matters. And so the two reasons that I specifically think that this communication piece absolutely matters is we're talking about autonomy and safety. And in this picture that I'm sharing, we have four young people who are standing in front of a communication board that and their teacher that is at the garden that I manage in Page Street Garden. And the Page Street Garden is a garden that my mother started over 30 plus years ago. And 4 years ago, we were able to renovate and really be able to create the space with the idea of modeling universal design. And in this idea, how do we make a model of what it can look like if we're planning for our whole community when we do our design? That was the biggest part of creating this garden and managing our and managing the improvements. And so as we look on here, we see young people who are actively engaged in looking at the symbols and figuring out how they can communicate and initiate communication. Two of the young people who are here do not use speaking as their primary form of communication. So it's really important. Hey, and the teachers didn't carry anything with them that allowed their students to communicate at the actual garden. They leave them in the school buildings. And so this is why I do this. We have to start modeling what we want to see. And so we're looking at this idea of autonomy and safety. We're thinking about why we have to make sure that communication is being treated as a number one human right and everyone has access to communication. What does communication actually mean? And so as a classroom teacher, and later again a teacher educator, that my North Star philosophy was that I wanted to provide all of my students opportunities that will prepare them for their greatest level of independence. And of course, every student being different, it's going to look different. Independence is different for the students based upon what their skills, needs, and their abilities would be. So while in undergraduate school, I was introduced to autism. And in that placement, an early education classroom was with students with who were considered having autistic characteristics. They were seven. The school itself was for kindergarten to 21. In that particular classroom, those kids were between 5 and 7 years old. And most of the kids, we had one student who talked a lot, and he was blind. And he had the sense of humor of Archie Bunker with a splash of Paul Mooney. And with him, he advanced my poker face training immediately. He was being taught Braille and orientation and mobility training. The other students in that classroom had access to extremely literacy rich classroom. We were in North Carolina, so they utilized Teach, the methodology where we're using visual schedules for the class, as well as individuals having their own schedules using PECs, picture exchange communication symbols. And it allowed them to pull off images and symbols to make requests, share ideas, answer questions. We had these large buttons at the time that looked like the Staples Easy button that we would put like one peck on it and the kids can hit it, and a recorded voice could share the one thing that could be recorded on there. So we had yes and no's. We had I don't know. We had a bathroom one. So there was like five or six that were typically around the classroom. And this is the 90s. So it was low tech, high tech kind of thing. And I was fascinated that this was like, wow, this is so cool. Because we're giving a kids the opportunity to have a voice and to share what they know and for them to make decisions and choices. Based upon the schedule that I was actually able to go and observe to do my field experience, I got there in time to go swimming. I had 10 minutes before we transitioned. So 10 minutes of finishing up an academic task. We walked down to the swimming pool, we changed clothes, we swam, all those things, and then transitioning back into the classroom. And I got to see kids essentially in three different environments: the classroom, the hallway, and the pool. And some people don't think about how different the expectations for those three different places are. But if you're working with some folks who have very different needs, we have to have very different rules and consistent rules and expectations for those three very different places. So I got to see them in three different settings on a regular basis. And so what I noticed on my very first day is one young lady, she had a quiet hum as a part of her daily task. And as we started transitioning out of her activity and moving towards now we're going to swimming, this hum elevated in its level of intensity and loudness. And as we were in the pool, it continued being extremely loud. This young lady, she would hold her ear, she would splash, close her eyes closed. And I watched her for the first day, and we're trying to figure out, oh my God, it was like the loudest loud ever and possible, right? And so the minute she got out of the pool, stopped. It went down to a super low hum, and her hands came off her ears. No problem. Just back to court. And the second visit, I said to the teacher, hey, let me ask her, I'm going to try something. So I asked the girl, I said, can we try a floating ring? Outside the classroom, I noticed too, we didn't bring the pecs, we didn't bring the boards. And so she let me put the ring on her more so out of compliance. She didn't say yes or no, but she's kind of let me put this ring around her body. And she got in the pool, still loud hum, super loud hum. And then she got in the pool. And when she got in the pool and she realized that her ears wouldn't get wet, her eyes couldn't get any water in them, the loud humming stopped. She went back to her normal, kind of chill, low vibrational hum. Wow. It was in that moment I realized I wanted to continue studying autism. It was clear to me had been communicating displeasure about the water in her ears, the water in her eyes, and this beautiful smile that went across her face when she realized that the water would no longer get into her eyes or in her ears. What made it even funnier that day is when we were getting dressed, she let me rinse her hair, even though her hair didn't get wet that day. And she went and she handed me a brush at the bottom of her bag. And she was a black little black girl, and her teacher was shocked because a teacher had tried to brush her hair before, and she said she shook her head no, and she handed me specifically the brush. And her teacher goes, "Really, Courtney? You think because I'm white I can't brush your hair?" And so again, I'm just thinking of all the things that this child, that some people think because she can't speak or doesn't speak and use words, she can't communicate. But this child had recognized culture. She had recognized and communicated the displeasure in her ears and her eyes. She recognized and she let us know she was happy when those things were no longer an issue. And so I knew without a doubt, no questions in my mind, that non speaking did not mean non thinking. This child had shown time and time again, over and over in many ways, how well in tune she was to what her needs actually were. So I felt it was my responsibility as a teacher, as an educator, to tap in and figure out how to make sure that it didn't take this like figuring out thing, but how do we make communication just more accessible? And so, again, communication for me is a fundamental human right. All people have the right to express themselves, advocate for their needs, participate meaningfully in their community. And all of this hinges on access to effective, individualized communication systems. In school systems, young people with disabilities that impact their access to communication tools, delayed interventions, and narrowly defined methods continue to limit the full potential of our young people who essentially at some point may turn into older people. And we know what happens when people get older and they don't have the skills. We know that you add race or low socioeconomic status to the lack of communication or the lack of effective communication systems, and we know the outcomes are going to get worse. Black and brown kids are known to get the least amount of services. They're being identified late for having a disability. And so again, they're missing opportunities for early interventions that include introductions to communication systems. So we're looking at most of the antidotes that I may use or focus on are going to be autism because most of my students that I've worked with who have communication access needs have autism as well. And so I want to quickly just review some of the criteria for autism as a medical diagnosis. I think it's really important that we consistently separate a medical diagnosis from an educational diagnosis because people hear autism and they think that, okay, if you have autism, you do this. When I first started teaching, it was like everyone with an autism diagnosis went to this classroom. And it's like, well, actually, this kid doesn't need to be in this classroom. This particular classroom I was teaching in, we did discrete trial training. It was very regimented. It was so many things. And I had students who came into that space and just didn't need to be in that space. And so making sure that we understand that just because you have a diagnosis of autism doesn't mean that you may need support as someone with autism in an educational setting. So being really clear about what that looks like. So we need to know that we're looking at persistent deficits in social and emotional and social interactions across multiple contexts. Being able to use language back and forth, or being able to use some kind of communication, back and forth. Deficits in nonverbal communication for social integration are typically poorly integrated verbal communication, verbal and nonverbal communications, abnormalities in eye contact and body language, deficits in understanding the use of gestures, abnormal affect. The students may be they may be limited or exaggerated, abnormal use of tone, pitch, or rate in speaking. Deficits in developing and maintaining understanding relationships, including adjusting behavior for social context. Restricted repetitive behaviors, patterns of behaviors, interests, and activities. And it could mean repeating movie lines. It could mean using those movie lines like to answer questions or to participate in a conversation. Unusual facial grimacing, non-functional play, covering ears and eyes, insistence on sameness and flexibility adherence to routine and structures, ritualized patterns of verbal and nonverbal behavior, extreme duress at small changes, highly restricted fixated interest, or often in hyposensitivity to sensory input or unusual interest to sensory environments. I want to skip down to, we need to also, it's under all of those or pieces and parts of those with the symptoms being present before the age of 8. and symptoms together limit and impair everyday functioning. Because if we have some of those pieces and it doesn't impair everyday function, then that person may not qualify for autism. And so there's a list, there is a combination of pieces that are a part of that to create that medical diagnosis. But the two pieces that bring those things together are those symptoms present before 8 and symptoms limit and impair everyday functioning. You may hear nonverbal, and in the advocacy world and up to date information, we were steering away from utilizing the word nonverbal. But when we're talking, when people are referring to nonverbal, we're talking about individuals who don't use spoken language to communicate as their primary form of communication. And we're talking about 25 to 40% of the autistic population could fall into this category. A better term, better terminology and language that's more advocacy, more person forward, and not focusing on the deficit, and it's more accurate, could be people who cannot rely on speech alone to be heard or understood, people with speech disabilities and speech related disabilities, people with communication access needs, people with expressive communication disabilities, people who cannot use speech as their primary means of expression, people who need, rely on, or require AAC, and AAC users or people who use AAC. And so just be
Dr. Jones, I'm going to interrupt. If you could just slow down a little bit for the interpreter.
thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm
Thank
so
you.
sorry for that. So again, just remembering that non-speaking does not mean non-thinking. And I'll state that again. I stated it again because too often than not, people are still thinking they have to fix people with disabilities or that they have to think for or do for. And the reality is, everybody wants to do as much as they can. That's just the way that we're wired, right? And so, providing access, that is our job when we're advocating and we are teaching or in positions of power and authority to help provide the access so that eventually someone is able to do as much for themselves as they can do, including speaking, including communicating, making choices, including deciding what they're going to wear, where they're going to work, how to express their interests. All of those things speak to the autonomy in learning the person. And so it's human nature to have an opinion, right? So people with communication access needs are absolutely no exception. So we're thinking about this autonomy conversation, and the lack of autonomy a lot of times is we're looking at a lot of missed opportunity. And a missed opportunity, I think of academically, I think of socially, relationships, workforce development, and even being able to turn our interest into employment. Some of the things that many people may take for granted, these are things that are limited because of the lack of being able to have an effective way of communicating one's needs, desires, and even knowledge. So if we're looking at placement, placement is a huge thing too. The more someone is able to be autonomous and communicate effectively, the less restrictive a placement may be available. And so we're looking at having greater access to general education curriculum and purposeful inclusion. We're thinking about safety. Safety is something that I don't think we talk about enough when it comes to people with disabilities and the level of victimization that happens with folks who are more profound in disability and are not able to speak up for themselves. So we're thinking about the bullying. Autistic youth and adults are highly vulnerable to both traditional bullying and cyberbullying. Studies indicate that autistic students experience bullying at rates nearly double of their non autistic peers, heavily impacting female presenting individuals and those current with ADHD. Sexual assault and harassment. 75% of autistic adults have experienced sexual harassment, and nearly 60 have survived sexual assault or violence. Unique vulnerabilities. Autistic individuals are often targeted due to a combination, of factors, including the need for social acceptance, difficulty reading, manipulative behaviors, hypercompliance, or the natural tendency of being overtrusted. The lack of proper education. We know that if you're not in the room, you're not going to get the information. So, sex education, conversations about consent. Our students are missing those conversations due to the lack of inclusion in many spaces. And so they're not prepared to have the conversation. They're not prepared to tell or understand what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And so they're at risk of misunderstanding also the legal implications of being able to, again, to report assaults and instances of bullying, and they may go unrecorded. So, as high as these numbers are, I honestly believe these numbers are not even accurate to how much victimization, sexual abuse, and assault are taking place with our students who have communication access.
Can I interrupt? Oh, wonderful. I I was worried your slides weren't progressing and you just progressed the slides. I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Thank you so much.
Please
And
go
so,
on.
so again, all of this matters. It comes down to several things. We talked about the safety piece of it, but we're also looking at 60% of our autistic adults are unemployed. What are these interactions with law enforcement? What happens when harsher penalties after arrested? If the law enforcement has no understanding of the person that's in front of them, they may assume that they're not cooperative, they're compliant, like all these things, and then like the charges and the heightened problems go higher. We have people who are being autistic adults and young people who are being arrested who have died in the custody of law enforcement because of the lack of understanding of the law enforcement officer and the person with autism that they are working with. Okay, so we have to understand how all the implications are constantly amping up the importance of effective communication. We also know that more than likely, so 30% of disabled people are working part-time and also face long-term persistent unemployment. Again, why this matters. We're looking at lots of misdiagnosis. We're looking at people just not getting what they need. We're looking at what happens when you have assault, victimization, how that moves to mental health and moves into possible substance abuse. All of these things are absolutely ramping up and becoming more and more problematic because because there's lack of communication or poor communication skills and abilities to communicate that's generalizable. Okay, so we have issues are happening. The numbers are extremely high for our youth and our adults with autism based upon their lack of ability to communicate in an effective way. Okay, substance abuse, really high numbers as far as substance abuse, bullying again, and then all these and some of these things again, we know that we have more. There's some 2004 data that is saying autistic people are having more suicidal ideation and attempts. 20% of autistic children have reported suicide ideation in the past year. So in 2023, 24, we're having students who are reporting ideation, and 10% have of those students have reported actually suicidal attempts. This is extremely scary to me as an educator and like a community auntie. I want our kids to be safe, and right now they're just not. And so my question for us is, what if a communication, if we can improve how our kids are getting learning effective communication, how we can change the trajectory of substance abuse, bullying, assault, and death? These are the questions that I'm asking on a regular basis. And so I also want to think through what could this look like and how do we best provide a multimodal way of communicating to teach effective systems of communication. So we know with the five modes of communication, we're looking at verbal communication, nonverbal communication, written communication, listening, and visual communication. And we know that talking just can't be the only standard. We have to think about how we can teach effective, again, generalizable communication needs as the standard. So I think back to Courtney, the young lady I talked about at the very beginning. I know that she didn't use her words, but we did learn that her hands over her ears meant that she didn't want water in her ears. We know that the squinting in her eyes meant she didn't want water in her eyes, right? And so she communicated that. She communicated joy with her smile. And so I really started thinking about that particular day as I planned out that day, that field experience overall. When I went into the classroom, one of my classrooms was an autistic class with early education. And so I thought about how can I make sure that we're doing the things that was in that class, but taking it to the next level. And so I thought about ways we could have better supported her as well as other students. What are some of the communication tools? What if we would have not left our communication tools in the classroom, but taking them with us when we go in the hallway, when we go to the pool? How do we make sure our students still have access to being able to initiate communication when they're not just in their classroom? And so for myself, again, early 2000s, I made lunch mats for the lunchroom. We had symbols, help, open up, milk, ketchup, sauce, yuck, I don't like. Those were basic things that were on everyone's lunch mat, right? And then things that may have changed depending upon the day, depending on what we were having for lunch, it may have been like the steps in building a sandwich for somebody. It could have also been like that we have outdoor recess or indoor recess so that we're planning what's next after lunch. Most of our students had at least 5 symbols on their boards, and some had 20 because they like to communicate a lot. And so we wanted to make sure that they could have the conversation they needed to have during their lunchtime. We also had extremely language rich classroom with schedules posted, individual schedules as well as classroom schedules, clear markings on the floor, for the line leaders and those kind of things, class jobs, routines, and structures where we signed and pointed to pecs and students made choices with symbols and images. Rudimentary AAC devices with the button, that big old easy button, were used. We had 2 machines that had like 4 buttons and 2 machines with like an 8 button, so we can add and record information on each of those buttons, and students could choose them. So we could sing songs and they could sing along. They could hit the vocabulary word when they got to that word. So I always provided ways for students to have engagement, high level engagement, even though they couldn't speak. Some of them couldn't speak. We had headphones with cassette tapes. We had the recording paper. I'm dating myself. When I could record my voice and we kept it on record and they can record them attempting to make those say the vocabulary words. We had students that were building sentences or building words. So again, we're teaching written communication. We're teaching listening. We're actively engaging them in all of the modalities and getting those back in the ways that were best for the student to be able to share that information. We sang songs, we signed, we gestured, we talked through our processes as we're thinking, we're completing these tasks, and we just provided students with multiple ways to engage and initiate our task. So again, we're talking about engagement, language skills, and social interactions. All of these things at some point were taught directly and practice and practice and practice throughout the day through discrete trials, through small groups, through large groups, just constantly with the routines. And they had multiple ways, again, to engage with the information, to see it. Some of our students were actually writing. Some kids were just matching and putting words together on cards where other students would put the words together, then they had to write. They had to then write their sentences because they were doing things that were aligned with grade level expectations. And this is the part that a lot of places do not do so well at, is making sure that students with disabilities or students with speech and communication disabilities are actually doing grade level work and content. And we miss out because the standard is the standard. Making it accessible is our job as the educators. And so making sure that our students are having access to grade level material, grade level standards, so that we can make sure that the written language is being developed, that we can make sure that they're getting what they need and being able to move forward. Now we have computers, everyone has a PC. So we have students now who are typing. They may be using AC devices, and we'll get into what those pieces are, but they're using multiple ways to communicate and engage so that they can do the work, show their work at the level that they're working at. Okay. And so one thing I'll say is too, we live in this world, in the perfect world, every teacher would do this. Every teacher would create these accessible ways to get to the information. And right now it sits on our advocates and our special educators to really push this as a standard to make sure that we're using multiple means to create effective systems of communication. And so we're thinking about some of the basic systems of communication. We think about gesturing, visual support, sign language, and augmentative alternative communication, which is referred to sometimes as AAC. Quickly just go through these. So, our gestures, we do okays, we do different signs on a regular basis that are just kind of like standard, like, this is choking. If you're choking, everyone, the universal sign for choking is this. And so looking at gestures, teaching facial, how are you feeling, and teaching some of those grimaces, those are things that have to be directly taught for some of our students. Some of our students are going to get it, some won't. But you go to the next one, right? So again, we're looking at more gestures, more physical, facial, add the face and the grimacing into it. What's appropriate? How does this look? Show me angry. Really getting people to understand what this looks like. And these are universal faces, shock, surprise, all those things. But really teaching, again, some of these things directly and then utilizing them as a part of your everyday routines with your young people. Low technology board, I mentioned PECs and PECs and picture exchange communication. So we have some folks who will point at this. This is similar to the communication board that is at the garden. So it's the one that's posted, it doesn't change. Having something like this in the notebook, students are able to find the words and symbols that they're looking for, and they're able to develop sentences and information. Making this more movable, I have used something like this as the base and then made a separate copy and use Velcro, lamination and Velcro, where students are able to pick and pull those things off and use them. Like they're taking off what they want and you're handing it to someone. So we're showing exchange of, communication through exchange. You're giving me something. I know what they want. Oh, you want to go to the bathroom? Thank you. Let's go to the bathroom. So I'm giving language to it, but it's based upon the actual physical symbol that they've handed to me. These are letter boards. There's a whole system, facilitated communication and letterboarding, where people are able to just spell the things they want. And there's a whole process of training that goes into this. I've never been trained in it. I work with two students now, or two young people now, that use these boards. And they're the person they work with uses the board, and they have a training, and they spell everything they're speaking about through the letterboarding. And so this is, again, something that is a process. There's, again, trainings that go that the person who's facilitating it and the person who is using it use together, so they are able to communicate, and the person who is working with them is able to voice or bring voice to what has been spelled out. Sign language. A lot of folks, we may use traditional ASL sign in addition to using pieces and parts of sign, depending upon ability, cognition, and whatever else they may be using as a means to share information. Personal computing and writing. The personal computer has definitely been a breakthrough also for this community. As if people are typing, I had a student a few years back where once he got a hold of this keyboard, he just was typing his little heart out. He also used an AAC device that had the program called LAMP, which is a motor planning program. And so the AAC devices, there's all types of AAC devices in size. Some are able to just, you press the button and the voice comes out and says it. Some you're able to put whole sentences or paragraphs. It just depends upon what the student who is using it needs and how they're able to navigate the different programs. The whole process and I'll go back, the whole process and being able to you have to go through an assessment process through the schools or the state. Each state operates with their assistive technology very differently. And so that's a whole nother process. For me, I want people to know this exists. We have a whole demographic of people that don't even realize that AAC devices are a thing. And so to me, that is extremely problematic. I've been in schools where I don't see any of these, and I barely see the low tech, just communication, picture exchange boards. But making sure that there's a way for our kids to communicate on a regular basis that allows them to show what they know, ask questions, initiate, and to be engaged with whatever is going on in the classroom. So they're just not sitting there. We want full engagement from all of our young people. And these devices allow some level of full engagement when used correctly and when everyone is trained accordingly. I find it fascinating again with technology. With all of the changes in technology, we really can use our phones. All of us at some point are using phones as some point of assistive technology. Some of the programs are able to work on a regular degular cell phone. And so we have the hardware now for it to be accessible. Now the conversation is making sure that people know the appropriate software to use as an AAC device or something to be used for an effective communication tool. And so, just overall, best practice, and we'll have plenty of time to talk. So, best practices is flexible. Everybody with the one diagnosis does not need the same thing. I think that is one of the major pieces that has to be stressed. We have to make things individualized for the needs of the person we are serving. Multimodal. It is so important that we have systems available and to figure out what works. Even after going through an assessment for the use of an AAC device, most places will take you through a process to figure out what might work better, um, depending upon, again, the skills of a student. Oh, I had a student, he started off with one thing, by the time it was said and done, he was with the lamp and he was able to go through it because of what that particular program was able to do. It was advanced enough where he can consistently add more and more and more vocabulary, and he was able to take what he did on lamp, type it. He was able to just do so many things. So he used the computer and he used the lamp program to communicate, and that helped him. He's an amazing writer, but for him to get his words out quickly when he's expressively, when he wants to be a part of a conversation, he uses the iPad that has the lamp installed. And so it allows someone to have choice in how they're working and what best works for them. Okay, so I think that is really important. I consistently use the word generalizable because I think back to one of my students. In his he was nonverbal, or a student who had communication access needs, and potty training was his thing. And I can't say how many times I changed that child's diaper, but his mom would swear that he was potty trained at home. And I would say to her, so what does it look like when he tells you or he lets you know that he needs to use the restroom? And she would say, well, he does this little dance. And I said, well, show me the dance because I don't see this dance. I need to know how to get him to the toilet, right? And he never did the dance for me. So though he communicated this way with her, it wasn't generalizable. And it's something that's really basic, but him not being potty trained at school, unfortunately, at the time, it stopped him from getting the right placement that he needed because the school he went to didn't allow him to go into the general ed kindergarten class because he wasn't potty trained. I think that's terrible. It was horrible. Academically, he was somewhere he didn't belong because this communication that his mom and him had was not generalizable. So it's a really basic picture of why it's important to have a system of communication that anybody, everyone could pretty much pick up on and being able to take and receive the information and move forward with it. All right. So I'm going to stop. Someone, before we go there, I'm just going to go questions. We're ready for questions.
Hi, this is Elise again coming on the screen. Um, if anyone has a question, please feel free to use the raise hand option. If you are on, I just lost what thing I was on. If you are on your phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand. You can also type any questions you have into a chat with our facilitator. So, Katie, do you have any questions typed to you? Okay, we'll give everyone just another second to ask any questions. Well, it sounds like we might not have any questions then.
Okay. Can I ask some questions?
You may absolutely go ahead. This is your lecture.
Okay, so my question, I have a question for this because I'm still new to Pittsburgh. I'm new back to Pittsburgh. Let me say that. I'm born and raised here, left, came back, right? And so I'm curious to if people have had difficulties advocating for to get AAC devices in the schools here or for their client or person they know who needs an AAC device.
If we have anyone in the chat who that applies to, please feel free to raise your hand. If anyone is watching this on YouTube after the live recording, you can email accessmobpittsburgh@gmail.com and we will absolutely get your question over to Dr. Jones to answer it, or, have a conversation about getting AAC available in your schools.
Mm-hmm. And also, are people, I want to also know, I guess I want to know who's here and how are people seeing the need or are they seeing people's needs met? Um, are we in different places? Like, what's common? Are we seeing multiple? Are we seeing the AC devices? Are we seeing the spelling boards? Like, what do we see in classrooms when we're going out? Like, I know what I see in classrooms. I'm just curious what other people are seeing in classrooms as it relates to students have communication needs. What's being used to help them being able to be fully engaged in their classrooms or in their community.
In the chat, I do have a question from Donna. What are some good resources to learn about multimodal communication for people who are interested?
Ooh. So I would start with just some basic, I would say some basic, I would look at, I'll say basic Googles, but um, Autism Speaks has some good information related to AAC devices. I would start there and kind of moving out and getting more information about specifics. I fell in love with LAMP, LAMP. It is a language acquisition motor program. Um, it's amazing. I'm just like, wow, everyone needs this. It's a really cool program. Again, it's used on a tablet. It allows students to pick their voice they want to use. It allows them to choose. It teaches a process of how language is actually just how do we use language, and you're able to use it. And the rules of English as we speak, they apply. And so you're learning how to use the lamp, but you're also learning how to better speak that translates into to writing, if that makes sense. Because sometimes some of the programs are so I'll say rudimentary, but are so like basic in what the speech is that doesn't translate to writing. So what I like about LAMP is it teaches the flow of language and the way that it's color coded. You're looking at nouns and verbs and pieces of language where the user is able to learn how language works as a whole system.
I want to acknowledge a message that I just received. We do recognize that Autism Speaks is an organization that is widely disliked by the autism community. So, we recognize that even a broken clock can be right twice a day, and maybe they have a couple of good resources, but we
Mhm.
do acknowledge that it is an
Mhm.
organization that is, to be polite,
Problematic. It can be
problematic.
problematic. And that's what's so hard with like the work is that again so many broken clocks, and so trying to coordinate like what are we following, what are the best practices, how do we eat the meat and spit out the bone when we're working with organizations or researchers, like what works and what's advantageous to our growth and our development and our movement, and what doesn't work, and leaving that behind. So that's an ongoing constant thing of eating the meat, spitting out the bone, which is why it's really hard for me to like name resources because so many of those people have a lot more bone and gristle than they have meat. And so, but they have some good stuff in there too, you know. So figuring out like why we're using AAC devices, and then talking with speech pathology and OTs. I want to keep saying lamp. Another reason I like that program is they utilize the speech people work with it, and the OTs work with it, because you're also doing the physical motor planning of picking and choosing, but you're also thinking about the speech component. So you're using your whole brain, like your mind is working as your body is working. So I like how it's developed. And so learning about what things are, and then kind of going into our IEP meetings and asking those questions like, okay, so how are we teaching writing? How is writing how are we learning about verbs and nouns when we're looking at, school age children? We're looking at high school students. How are they having access to readings that are classics? So wherever we are, we need to make sure that we're asking those questions. How do we know that the child is knows the information? You know what I mean? Like how are we showing engagement, and how are we showing mastery? Are we only waiting for words at from the verbal space? And like that's the problem if the answer is yes.
I have two comments from the chat. The first one from Rebecca says, I work as a neuropsychologist in juvenile detention spaces. There are no accommodations or access devices for youth with communication needs. We also can't get access to speech path services or interventions while youth are detained. And then from Hope, Hope says, I'm only seeing these amazing devices in early intervention and autism support rooms.
Mhm. And I think that's a shame and a crime, both of those answers. I think it's disgusting. I think that by pushing communicate to me, I want to push communication in this space. Like you would think I was a speech and language pathologist. I'm not, right? But I know how powerful communication is to one's outcomes. We are not providing kids what they need. You would not have a child in the detention center who used a wheelchair who didn't have access to his wheelchair. That would never happen. Right. And so why has it become okay that this person doesn't have the tools they need to communicate? They're essentially setting those kids up for failure. And sometimes our accessibility things, to me, it's less about the person who needs the access, but it's about if it's easy for the other people to deal with it. Um, cue in the airport conversation, cue in like so many conversations around, really, are we doing something to meet the need of the person, or are we making it easier for the people that are working with the person? That's the question. I think too often than not, we're not making it about the person that we're trying to empower.
I like your use of empower there. That is the right word.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a crime. Like there's so many things that are happening in schools and systems that are absolutely criminal. Um, they're just criminal. And there's the lack of thought and foresight and wholeness for individuals is completely problematic. We're still in the medical model, even though we allegedly know better. We're not doing better at all.
Okay. We have Laura Power with her hand raised. Uh, give us a second and we'll get you unmuted. Katie, are you able to? Okay. Yes, Laura, feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Um,
You are still muted if you are. There you go.
Okay. Um, it says the it says wait, can you guys hear me?
yes,
Yes.
we can.
Okay. I wanted to know um I, I wanted to know what is being done to introduce and to make the general public more aware of them, to give these children more accepting environments, because you can give the you can give the user all the technology out there, but if there's not an awareness and a sensitivity to those needs, then so what's being done to increase sensitivity among
Yeah.
non-AC users and bring those conversations up in spaces where it's not
Mhm.
typically brought up?
Great question. Unfortunately, very little is being done. That's the reality. Very little is being done. Um, a lot of this work I've seen. I have a project that I'm starting to fundraise for, for awareness, but very little, honestly, is being done. What I'm seeing is, again, in the early childhood space. I have a friend whose son is starting kindergarten, and in the preschool space he has an AAC device, and when he got this device, they trained the teacher and the students in his classroom about his device. And so the students that were in the classroom with Cairo, they too knew how to work his device. So his peers got to see it. So that's a really small. I was like, wow, that's awesome. But that should to me that should be a norm, because if he's my friend and I want to talk to my friend using what my friend uses to communicate, I too need to know how to work it and use it, right? And so those are some of the ways that some of the devices are doing. Different school districts are actually training the whole class, and as I guess the student moves on, they'll continuously train that class who's in the classroom with the student who is using that device. That is a good way of doing it. I think there needs to be more things at the large media platforms. I purposely again install the communication board at my garden because I want that to be the norm. I want to now train the schools that come to my garden on a regular basis. I want to train their teachers on why they need to bring their boards, because they say they have boards for these kids in the classroom. They don't bring them to the garden. So, so I'm trying to get those folks to like bring your board with you, bring a board on the walk so that you're having conversations about what the kids are seeing while you're walking down the street. So this becomes normal that we're seeing these communication boards, that we're asking for high tech. If we can get high tech, let's move that. But it comes with people knowing. A lot of our educators don't even know these things exist. They don't know there's things they could be advocating for. They don't know how they could be utilized in their classrooms. And so the more our educators know, the more we see it in our communities, the more we can get some leverage and some support behind it. I want to see this on the silver screen. Like I do. There's a movie on Netflix. It's about 15-20 minute movie on Netflix, and it's focusing on the facilitated communication with the pointing of the word, the pointing of the letters. That's, I think it's called Michaela's Voice. That's on. Michaela's father is a hip hop producer. So he's someone again that has means, that has access to this. They have a Netflix show right now. So the more we can get this visibility in the rest of the world, it needs to be more common. But it's about the advocacy behind communication. I think is going to be what's going to push us to seeing people without disabilities understanding it, and people with disabilities having access to it if they need it.
Wasn't there that show called Speechless a while ago about a young person who used an AAC?
That sounds, yeah, I feel like I saw that.
I'm not much of a TV person, I'm sorry, but I agree with you that normalizing things in the media, we
Mhm.
don't think about this, but technically texting was created as a form of alternative communication device for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and we've now normalized it as an everyday thing. So, if we can do that with texting, we should be able to do it with everything. So I appreciate so much you having those boards at your garden. I think that's wonderful.
I'm excited about my little board. And then I was also thinking of my master's. I used it was before it was a phone. Remember we had like 5 devices for everything your phone did, but it was back when it was just like a PDA. So I had a student who was on the spectrum, and he was a talker. Let me tell you, he was a talker. But he would talk so much the teacher couldn't teach because he was asking questions and doing all his things. And so a part of my research was getting him to use a check. He had to put check parts on his calendar, and once he saw he had 5, he couldn't talk anymore. Okay, so we have extremes in autism, but he couldn't talk anymore after he had 5 conversations or comments. He had to close his PDA, right? But PDA, everyone was so in. Oh wow, what's next? What's he got? What's he got? But now everyone has a phone. Everyone has access to the thing that we were utilizing for a very targeted demographic, which I think for me, now that everyone has a phone and most of us have, access to a tablet if we wanted one or a computer, there's so much more access. Again, we have the hardware. Now it's about making sure people understand the software and how revolutionary and that software could be to peek into and allowing people to communicate that in the past may not have been able to communicate effectively.
Well, a last call for any comments or questions.
I, nice. Okay, I'm gonna write that
Oh,
down.
is
Thank you.
that Lost Voice guy? Oh gosh, Lost Voice guy is also, he does his entire routine using ASC and he's delightful. So it is hopeful that we are seeing more of this in the media. So,
Mhm.
well, last call for questions and comments. Okay, well, again, if anyone comes up with questions or comments after the fact that they want to give to us or to pass on to Dr. Jones, you can email us at accessmobpittsburgh@gmail.com. On the screen right now is a list of our upcoming events. You can find any of them at accessmobpittsburgh.org. Most of the events that we have listed here are our community lecture series. There is a drop-down tab on the top of our website that says community lecture series. You can find these events. We have a couple of not our regular Monday events, but we have a couple of bonus events coming up this in the next couple months. So on Saturday, June 13th from 12 to 1:30, we're going to be hosting researchers from Carnegie Mellon who will be doing a talk on the robot in our path. How do public area robots impact sidewalks, and how can we design them to be more socially appropriate? On Monday, July 27th from 6 to 7:30 will be our regular lecture night on empowered esports. I got to go to one of these events recently, and it's absolutely wonderful watching all these people play video games using adaptive devices and just kids being kids, and it was great. So I'm excited for this one. Uh, on Saturday, August 8th from 12 to 1:30 as a special event, we will be hosting people from the uh, Commission on Human Relations, navigating your need for a service or support animal workshop. And then I'm going to skip one event. On Monday, September 28th, we have from 6 to 7:30, we'll be hosting our lecture on thinking outside of the box, employment and persons with disabilities. So those are our upcoming community lecture series. I also want to put out that on Saturday, September 26th from 12 to 4 p.m., will be the annual Disability Pride Pittsburgh celebration at Shenley Plaza. And you can find information about that on disabilitypridepa.org/Pittsburgh. Next slide, please. So thank you again to everyone who showed up to our wonderful lecture today. We are able to do all of these lectures, all these events from the generosity of our donors and sponsors. Sponsors is not the right word, but people who donate to us. On the screen right now are QR codes to donate with PayPal, Cash App, or Venmo. Please be sure to write AMP, AMP, in the payment section when you do so that Disability Pride knows to funnel that money towards us. And then I just, once again, want to thank so much Dr. Jones. This was wonderful. I appreciate you so much coming out and talking tonight. I want to thank my board, Debbie, Donna, Kendra, Mallory, Monica, Nyota, and Reggie. I'm going to give the interpreter a second to catch up with that. Um, I want to thank our wonderful meeting manager, Katie. I want to thank Disability Pride PA for being our fiscal sponsor and helping us through everything. And a million thanks again to the Opportunity Fund for providing funding to continue this lecture series. Keep an eye out on your emails either tonight or tomorrow morning. I'll be sending out the survey to fill out about this lecture. We really would love your feedback on, what you thought, how we can do things better in the future. And my final note is, hi, Mom, I see you in the audience, and I'm so excited you're here. So, anyway, thank you again, everyone, for coming out tonight. And, yeah, have a wonderful rest of your evening.